Well, I just want to start out by saying thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me and to do this. It's an absolute honor, sir, to talk to you. I've followed a lot of your stuff, and I found it through Troy and the data and everything that you've put together, everything that you have shared with the bow hunting and archery community has helped lots of people, myself included. So I just wanted to start by saying thank you for taking the time to chat with
Well,
me.
you're welcome. I actually started out doing this stuff for my own use, and things sort of fell in place, and I got lucky a bunch of places and started getting enough information together that I thought, nah, the whole bow hunting community deserves to be able to access this.
Hmm.
So, I started putting out there where everybody could access it. It's always been free. I copyright things, but I also make it free for anybody who wants to use it. And
Well,
so it's out there for anybody that wants it. And
and
that's the way
maybe,
we operate the foundation too. Everything's free.
and I appreciate that. I know a lot of other people do. That it's free. I think it's unbiased. I love that it's that. It's not, you know, with your work, both in, all of your testing, which we'll get into, but even just the foundation, from the other podcasts and stuff that I've listened to, how uh, you don't take sponsorship money or product. You guys
No,
buy
we
everything.
don't accept anything from the archery industry, and that's one reason I told you I wanted to plug the foundation. But that's one of the reasons we do need donations from individual bow hunters, because we fund everything from that, other
Hmm.
than what I myself put in, and Rob Nielsen, who's the foundation president, puts in, and the other board members. We all chip in to a large extent to keep it going. But one of the things we're up against is we have to get, I think it's 33 and a third percent of our funding from small donors outside the foundation, or we lose our 501c3 status, our tax exempt
Okay.
status. And you have to become a private foundation. And that wouldn't be good for the people that donate, because the
Right.
way it is now, they can deduct it. It's all tax deductible, 100%.
Do you since we're talking about the foundation, do you kind of want to just give, if people don't know what the Ashby Bowhunting Foundation is, do you want to kind of tell them about what it is, where to find it? We can start off with that if you want to.
Well, we're, of course, you can always find us. We're www.ashbybowhunting.org. That's all one word. And we are a .org, not a .com. And that will bring you up to the website. And there's a ton of information on there. It will take somebody days and days to go through all the information that's there, and longer than that if they want to actually digest it all. Because we have all of the study updates, going way back to the original Natal study. So just a world of information there. And let me refer over here. Where's my notes? All the things I wanted to tell people. Yeah, our board members are all non-paid volunteers.
Okay.
100% of all the donations to the foundation go to operational expenses and projects. And like I said, we don't make any archery equipment. We don't sell any archery equipment. Uh, all the items we test, we purchase at retail across the counter, just like everybody else buys them. Um, and when we mentioned we don't take any donations from the foundation, that does keep us totally independent from any kind of archery industry influence on the findings of the testings.
Okay.
And when you donate to the foundation, the donation page is also on our website. There, you'll see two different options there. One is for the general operating fund. And this is the funds for the foundation's operational costs, the equipment for the testing, any fundraising projects, like the hog hunt we did this spring. The other donation option is to the Youth Education Center Fund. Now, this is a long-term project. Who knows, maybe decades away. But all the donations to this fund will be used to purchase, maintain, and operate a ranch that is to serve as a youth educational facility.
That's awesome.
And offer youth hunting opportunities. Now, these donations that go into the Youth Education Fund can only be used for that one purpose and cannot be transferred to the general operating fund.
Okay.
So if you make a donation there, it's locked in for there for however long it takes to raise all the several million it's going to cost. But I look down the road, at some point it will happen.
Dr. Ashby, for I think I would hope that the people that are seeing this probably already know who you are, a lot of the work that you've done. But if there's somebody new tuning in, or they're just getting into some of the building arrow systems, looking at your 12 factors, kind of just getting into this this realm of bow hunting, can you just give people kind of your background, as far as how you got into this, and what it exactly is that you studied and accomplished?
Well, I started bow hunting really young. In fact, when nobody even thought of a compound. Uh, and I shot my first deer with a bow when I was 12. And I was hooked long before that. When I was in the third grade, Howard Hill came to our school promoting the movie Timbo. And I saw him shoot. And that did it. I went home that day and cut down a willow branch and made a bow and made some arrows and sniffed out points out of tin cans and plucked feathers out of the chickens and ducks, tied them on with sewing thread. Off I went. Bow didn't last, but I don't know, half a dozen, maybe a dozen shots before it broke, but I was hooked. And from then on, bow hunting was the thing. Now, Dad was an avid hunter, but he was an NRA rifle instructor. Okay. He never did grasp why I wanted to bow hunt. and surprisingly, it didn't catch on with my older brother, although he did go out a few times with me to shoot. Mm-hmm. But that just wasn't for them. My brother's idea of great hunting was to be able to hit an animal with his rifle at 600 or 700 yards, which he could do. I mean, we were highly rated competitive shooters as teenagers. We were 12th and 13th in the nation.
Wow.
And so we were pretty good, and we won the state championship, and they got into a lot of outdoor shooting. I've done a lot of competitive rifle shooting, and on up through metallic silhouette shooting. I've done some shooting out to some competition to 1,000 yards, but most has been metallic silhouettes. What I enjoyed most, big bore, small bore, handgun, all of it. But once I got into bow hunting, that to me the essence of hunting was not to be like my brother and shoot it at 600 or 700 yards. I wanted to shoot it at handshaking distance. It was beating the animal in his own game that really got me hooked. And when I started out young, Dad teaching us to use a rifle to hunt with used to give us 122 shell, and we could go out and hunt. And as long as we brought something back, he'd give us another shell. We could do that all day long, as long as we killed with every shot we fired. And if you missed, you were done for today. Tomorrow you can try again. But he was teaching us hunting skills. But when I got into archery, I had to teach myself a whole new set of hunting skills. And it took a lot of years to learn about how to find out what the animals are doing and what the sign in the woods is telling you, and how to track and trail game. But probably most difficult of all was learning to stalk, to truly stalk.
Okay.
Both the use of primary hunting technique under the right conditions, like bedding areas when the animals are bedded up and things like that. Or you almost always use it if you're doing spot and stalk. You need those skills for your final approach. You know, that's something I really see being lost today, is that people don't go out and learn these skills. And I think a lot of it is because almost all the hunting now is out of a stand somewhere. You know, there's not a lot of areas you can go out and hunt and stalk. Probably one of the advantages we have in Texas, we don't have a lot of public land. So you're generally hunting on private land. So you don't have to worry about somebody else shooting you. You know, you pretty much know who's out there. And you know where everybody's at, or the areas they're hunting at least. And so you're pretty much free to go out and hunt the way you want to hunt. And I think that's an advantage we do have down here. Had a lot of that. I did 2 tours with the Air Force up in Alaska, and same thing up there. Even though you've got public lands everywhere, there's so few people. You don't feel like somebody's going to shoot you when you're out there, you know, fully camouflaged, sneaking along in the woods. So, you know, I can't fault people too much, because I don't think they have the opportunity, and they probably don't have the mentors to teach them these skills. I mean, most of the people that know these skills, you know, they're getting long in the tooth like me, and they're not able to pass it along to many people. I wish people could experience a lot more of it. And I had hoped I bought a whole video setup and everything. And I had a young girl that quite into hunting and bow hunting, quite an accomplished archer. And I was going to take her through step by step, teach her this stuff and try to get videos of it all. But then health issues stepped in, and that's just gone by the wayside. Just haven't been able to do it. And doesn't look like I'll be able to do it the way things are going. Although I always hope for the best. You know, I plan to hang around a long time, because I need to make triple digits. I got to live that long to make back the money the government owes me, between what I can make private practice and what they paid me.
With the that comment, you know, talking about the hunting industry, some of the lost woodsmanship, or hunting on the ground, or still hunting stalking. Do you think that's like a technology type of a
It
thing?
is, and I watch, you know, because I can't get around to a lot of other stuff. I watch a lot of the archery stuff that comes up on YouTube. And just like with bows and arrows and equipment, there's a lot of not really good information out there where people are trying to show you how to stalk. And they don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand true stalking. You need to watch an African lion stalk to learn how to stalk. The closest we can come around here is if you watch a house cat.
Yep.
House cats are pretty good at stalking. I don't think quite as good as lions, but they're pretty good. You know, a lot of your other big cats and so forth don't hunt a lot by stalking, but lions primarily hunt by stalking. And even then, and it's a good analogy for the bow hunter to not get excited when he blows his stalk. They say lions are only successful on 1 out of every 10 stalks.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Yeah. I was a lot more successful than that. So I think I'm better than a lion.
And I guess, yeah, I just assumed listening to your other content that all of your hunting in Africa, all of the stuff that you did for the studies was stalking based, right? That
Yeah,
was the
yeah,
only way,
yeah.
or
Yeah, even the guiding I did over there for the bow hunters and gun hunters,
okay.
stalking. You know, I'm not. I took clients down a couple of times hunting South Africa, and you shoot animals out of a concrete blind at a watering hole with feeders, and that's shooting. That's not hunting. You know, you need to be out there in really thick brush, you know, picking up the trail of a herd of buffalo, following them for hours and stuff where at the best you can see 15 yards. And when you get a chance, it's going to be close. But so often you're in the middle of a herd and you can bend down and look under the brush and you can see legs all around, but you can't see a buffalo. And when you do that for hours on end, it is an adrenaline high that cannot be equaled.
I can imagine.
It's just absolutely fascinating. And if something does spook the herd, if you make a mistake to spook them, animals don't know where you are. They run every which direction. So you have to be careful of that too. And that can get real exciting when it happens.
Of what was your favorite game that you hunted when you were in Africa?
Oh, in Africa, it would be the Cape buffalo and elephant.
Okay.
Those are the most fun. They're also the most work if you're hunting them fair and square. If you're trailing them up, hunting them out there, unless you're just lucky, and that happens once in a while, where the animal stumbles into you, you didn't find the animal. But most of the time, it is hours and hours and miles of hot, thirsty walking. We have in some days covered as much as 20 miles
Oh,
in a
geez.
single day. And, you know, that's a long way on foot.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly when you're trying to hunt. You know, you're not just out there walking like you'd be on the highway going one place to another.
Yep.
And, it makes a long day, but it's so rewarding when you get to the end of it.
Oh, I
That's
bet.
what makes the hunt.
And
Yep.
so with all of your studies, was there a wide range of animals that you did your
Oh yeah.
Natal studies on, or was it
Yeah,
focused
the
mainly
original
around?
study was actually done on smaller animals.
Okay.
The biggest animals in there were, I think we had one eland in there. Next down would have been kudu. We had several of those.
Okay.
Inyala, impala, warthogs, you know, that size animal. So that was the entirety of the Natal study. It wasn't until I got arrow systems up to the point that I was shooting through animals that I started looking around for a big animal to test on.
Okay.
And buffalo turned out to be the perfect test animal. They
What?
have ribs that essentially overlap.
Okay.
They're big, heavy bones. They're relatively flat, not as curved as a lot of other bones anyway. So you can get almost a flat direct impact test shot. Then you can go around it at angles and get angular shots to look at what happens with broadheads as they skip off of bones and how bad different broadheads skip and so forth. It didn't take very long because I shot a fairly heavy longbow. The lady was 94 pounds at my 27 inches of draw, and it didn't take long, before all my arrow setups that I used would shoot through any of the standard size animals, on reasonable angle shots. But I got it up to the point that even on end-to-end shots, most of the time I wasn't retrieving it. And unless the arrow actually stops in the animal, I can't compare one arrow setup to another because you've changed penetration mediums. The instant you exit that animal into the air, you have now gone into a different penetration medium. And you can no longer compare any measurement you've got there against something that stopped in the animal.
Yeah.
So that's what pushed me to bigger animals. And a lot of people say, "Oh, we didn't test with compound." We did a lot of testing with compound. But once I got really good arrow systems coming along, with the compounds, I was shooting through Cape Buffalo. This didn't help me. So I went back to doing all the testing with traditional bows. And if you look at the later studies, 2007, 2008, I went to lighter draw weight traditional bows, all the way down to a 40-pound bow.
Okay.
Because I had the arrow systems set up so well that they weren't stopping in the Cape Buffalo, with traditional equipment. So I had to go down in bow weight to do my testing to keep it valid testing.
And all of this, I guess, just in case the listeners maybe don't know, all of this was because you received a letter, correct, from because you were wanting to hunt. Was it a white rhino with
Well,
a bow?
it wasn't a letter. I had actually started about 3 years before that,
Okay.
collecting data for my own use. Because the first year I changed over to a compound, I read what was in the magazines, and like most bow hunters, I went whole hog. And I had a dart, and I got some real lightweight arrows set up because that's what everybody was saying works so great. And of course, mechanicals didn't exist at that point.
Yep.
But I got some multi-blade replacement blade broadheads because these made bigger cuts and were more deadly. And the first year I used them, I was in Minnesota at that point, working on the Indian reservation up there. And the first year I used those, I hit and failed to recover 4 deer.
Okay.
Now, I had never had this kind of problem before. Using my old, slow, traditional equipment. I mean, even back when I was young and was shooting, 42 to 45 pounds, I shot through animals. You only had a few choices. You had fiberglass. Now, I'm not talking carbon. You had fiberglass arrows like the microflats, or you had aluminums. And the time you set those up, most of the broadheads are pretty heavy, and I tended to use real heavy broadheads. You were shooting 700 grain arrows, even out of 40-pound bows. And, I'm trying to think. I can think of one deer that I left an arrow in, and that's because I hit it high, cut the spine, and it stopped right at the fletching.
Yeah.
And that was with a microflight, a number 10 microflight.
And so that was kind of what kickstarted your research into.
After that failure, I started collecting my own data. And this is where fate stepped in. I've lived a blessed life. Time after time, fate has stepped in. I don't know if anyone will ever have the opportunity to do the testing that I did, because the opportunities won't be there. Mm-hmm. That sounded like Kamala Harrison, didn't it? But yeah, I had written to South Africa to ask about hunting a white rhino. And several years later, I got the reply I got back was, you can't do this. Bow hunting's not legal, for the big animals at that point. I don't think it's even legal for a lot of the small animals at that point. But they were having a meeting there at Natal, the Parks Board meeting, and they wanted to look at the possibility of legalizing bow hunting as a way to bring in more foreign exchange into the country. Because that, hunting is a big industry in Africa. And one of the topics came up about, how big an animal can we take? And someone at the meeting, and I think it was probably Spud Ludingham, but I don't know that for absolute certain, said, somebody wrote me a few years ago about wanting to hunt a white rhino. Let me see if I can find that information. And he went and looked in his files, and he still had my information. They called me on the phone, traced me down, I didn't have my phone number there. They traced me down and got a phone number, and called and asked if I was still interested in coming to South Africa and hunting a white rhino with my bow. And I'll let you guess how long I had to think about it. And so, we set up the hunt. Now, that was only the second paid for guided hunt that I ever went on in my life. And I went over there, did that hunt. While I was there, they got talking about all this, what they were trying to do. And they, after we took that rhino, they said, you want to come back next year and see if we can repeat this. See if it's a fluke. Can you repeat it? And after that, we're going to do some testing down at Makuzi Park. Every year they cull several thousand animals, because one of the things the so-called environmentalists always talk about is, hunting, you're destroying the animal population. Well, the animals have a finite amount of territory, because the human population now has taken away what used to be in Africa. Mm-hmm. So you've got these little islands of animals in a forested area or bush belt area. And so you have to cull the numbers down every year, or the animal population gets so high, it destroys the habitat, and all the animals die. Mm-hmm. And Non-hunters don't seem to be able to grasp that concept. But anyway, they said, we're going to go in before the rifle call, and we've got all these animals we can shoot. And what we'd like to do is set up, and every time an animal comes in, uh, if you think you can hit the animal, take the shot. Because we want to look at what happens when the shots are in bad places too. And we were back with a rifle.
Yeah.
So that if there was any question about it being a lethal hit, they would put the animal down with a bullet that was remote from where the arrow went in, so we could look at what the arrow actually did and try to ascertain, would it have been lethal? If not, why was it not lethal? And if we couldn't do it, they had veterinarians on staff, which loved the whole animal up to take it in. And they had facilities where they could do everything up to elephant.
Wow.
So, they would come up with exact information for us. But most of the time we could easily tell in the field what it was. But there were a few animals we had to carry in and say, hey, you make a call on this, would this have been a lethal hit or not? But anyway, that's basically the way we did the Natal study. And when they asked me to come over, they said, we don't, of course, archery equipment wasn't available in South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And because there was no bow hunting, it just wasn't legal. And they said, bring as many different arrow setups as you can bring, different broadheads, different shaft materials, different weight arrows. Let's look at all this stuff and see, what we can find out, because we had there was no information base, absolutely none. There were anecdotal stories that people had, but as far as hard data, none existed whatsoever, zero. And so we were starting from scratch and inventing how to do this as we went. And after we got through with all of it, we did come up with some amazing conclusions that to this day astonish me. People talk a lot when we talk about factors, when you get into it, the 650 grain heavy bone threshold.
Yep.
If you look back in the report on the original Natal study, it's got a statement in there that it appeared that you needed 650 grains of arrow mass in order to reliably break heavy bone, regardless of the broadhead used.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the things that amazed me. And then one of the things that came out of the study that till this day stands up was that people shoot an animal and they fail to recover. They say, I made a bad shot. The number one cause of a failure of the arrow to kill was lack of adequate penetration. Had the arrow penetrated deep enough on the trajectory it was passing through the animal with, it would have been lethal. And those failures to penetrate occurred for a number of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But it boiled down to failure to penetrate.
What that has been, that right there, the failure to adequately penetrate is what brought me to find Troy and ultimately find you. Was, you know, basically shooting they if you want to call it like a modern setup, both with a compound and a crossbow. But
Yep.
basically the same weight that you would buy them once you got them cut to length, or you buy a 20-inch crossbow arrow, you put 100 grain mechanical broadhead on it, and you know you hunted. And it wasn't until some issues that I needed to make a change. Um, I did want to ask you though, because I feel like I see these comments all the time, of kind of, especially, being that like I just said, I hunt with both a vertical bow and a crossbow, but a lot of what I've been doing on YouTube is uh, is a crossbow side of things, and taking honestly what I've learned from you, from Troy, and applying it to the crossbow side of things. And one question I get all the time for kind of the people that don't want to go heavy and fixed blades and all that stuff is like, okay, compounds, crossbows, they have so much, they're capable of producing so much energy. Why waste that energy by zipping really fast through a deer when I've got plenty of energy to shove this massive 3 blade expandable through a deer and create a bigger wound channel? And ultimately, I think in their mind, they feel like that's a more lethal setup, and one that's, I guess, utilizing all the energy and not wasting it by, burying a fixed blade into the dirt. Um,
Yeah.
what I guess kind of what would you say to those people that, um, and I'm not saying anything is necessarily right or wrong or what you have success with or what you don't, but those would be, I guess, a lot of the people that just I don't think disagree with your studies, but just seem to think that that is still a better setup than shooting a heavy, um, high structural integrity fixed blade.
Well, you got to start with a couple of premises. One is that the concept that an arrow is always flying.
Okay.
From the time you turn loose of it, it flies through the air. When it hits the animal, it flies through the animal. Always changes the medium that it's penetrating through, that it's flying through. Comes out, flies in the air again. Hits the dirt, it flies through the dirt till it stops.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it hits a tree, it flies through the tree until it stops. So it's always flying. So a lot of flight dynamics come into the terminal performance of an arrow. Now, everybody has had it pushed on them for generations about all that's important is to get pinpoint accuracy out there on the animal. They don't look at what's going to happen from the time they hit the animal on. Now, they can talk about, oh, they're higher energy bows, push these big cut mechanical broadheads through animals every time. But all you got to do is watch some YouTube videos to disprove that.
True.
And be that with a crossbow or a vertical bow. And if you get a chance to do a podcast with Jim Aiken,
Mm-hmm.
you can talk to him about that. That's what brought him with his crossbows over to looking at our stuff in the study.
Okay.
Is that he, with all of this force, all of this energy the crossbow was generating, he wasn't penetrating through animals. So he knew something was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And it clicked. And of course, he's got an engineering background. He's an engineer. So, this stuff made sense to him when he got to looking at it. And he's done a ton of testing since then. But back to where I was about
Mm-hmm.
the flight, the faster you're going, the greater the resistance.
Yep.
And, that's easy to experience yourself. Just stick your hand out the car window at different speeds and you can feel the difference in the resistance. But to quantify it, it goes up logarithmically logarithmically. Yeah, I think that's right. Uh, if you double your velocity, say my longbow against one of the more modern compounds, they could shoot double the velocity. The resistance in air is 4 times the resistance of my arrow.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it doesn't make a lot of difference. You don't notice it in air. The tissue is a lot denser. And some tissues, like bone, are much denser than others. And when you start flying through that medium, the resistance factor makes a big difference. And people overlook that they're not used. People in the gun world spend a lot of time talking about terminal ballistics. How many people do you ever hear talk about terminal ballistics and the mechanics of it in the archery world?
None, or almost none.
Almost none. When was the last time anybody mentioned the sectional density of their arrow? It makes
Never.
a difference. But they never mention it. You know, there's all sorts of things like that that the archery world isn't plugged into. And I flat out blame the archery industry. They have pushed faster, faster, faster because they can sell speed.
Hmm.
You know, how many bows are they going to sell if they say, well, you know, your old bow that shoots 240 feet per second, you know, actually will outpenetrate sometimes what these faster bows will do. And one of the interesting things we're finding, we've got around a couple of thousand hunted buffalo that we have information from. Now,
Okay.
admittedly, this is feedback, anecdotal information, but it lines up well with the information we've got from the studies. We're finding that a lot of people shooting with compounds, shooting 70 pounds and below, are getting a higher percentage of pass-through shots on Cape Buffalo than are the people shooting above 70 pounds.
Interesting.
Quite interesting. That's got to be a resistance factor, I can think. And this is, you know, most of the time using decent arrow setups. So it even affects the better arrow systems. So if that's not what's causing it, I don't know what it is. That is the only thing I can think of that could be causing this result. But it is so consistent that there's got to be something there. I mean, these people don't know each other. You know, they're not getting on emails every night and saying, oh, let's all get together and put out the same message. That's a Democratic ploy. No, let's don't get into politics.
When it
There's enough politics in archery.
What's that?
So there's enough politics in archery.
Oh yeah, there is. I mean, gosh, you know, if you want to, I ask you this because I don't know if I've ever heard you talk about it. If you want to talk archery
Sure.
politics, I mean, simply the compound versus crossbow debate. Whether or not, you know, the more crossbows have been introduced into regular archery seasons, a lot of times, or the popularity that they're kind of gaining. Certainly, the more I would say division between hunters has been in that archery space. Kind of, what are your thoughts,
Well,
Dr. Ashby, on kind of the crossbow versus compound
there
stuff?
are enough anti-hunters in the world that hunters do not need to be fighting each other.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've got no problem going out there. I'd rather hunt with my longbow than I had a crossbow or a compound because I like the challenge of it. And for the way I hunt, it is the superior weapon. It's superior to either the compound or the crossbow. And that's a whole nother podcast. But we don't need to be fighting against each other. Hunters have got to be unified, and that goes for gun hunters, bow hunters.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would have no objection to seeing a separate archery season set up that was for traditional, and then one that was open to traditional compounds, crossbows, whatever. Like I would have no problem seeing, particularly the crossbow, put in with muzzle loaders. You know, I've seen a lot of crossbows that shoot better than muzzle loaders do. And I've done a fair amount of muzzle loading hunting too. So, you know, that's not the direction our politics should go. Our politics should be a solid wall defending our sport against the anti-hunters.
Mm-hmm.
Or one of these days, we're going to end up not going to have any hunting.
Mm-hmm.
The number of hunters, because the hunting opportunities are not as great, and the mass of the people are living East Coast, West Coast. Well, you're not going to do much bow hunting in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
or Los Angeles, or San Diego. It's just not, the opportunity isn't there. So you're getting generations that grow up that have no exposure to hunting. So they don't know anything about it. And if we're not a united front working against that as hard as we can, we're going to lose everything. And people can look at Australia and see it. I was in Australia doing testing. And along with my other stuff, I had 5 crossbows I was.
Okay.
Somebody stuck an arrow in a kangaroo that went bouncing around the neighborhood for days without dying. Down in South Australia, I think, somewhere in the southern part. And what happened? Outlaw crossbows. So you can't bring crossbow in down there. You can't even get repair parts for one. Illegal, ship it into the country. Now, because they've had a very similar thing with a compound, there's already talk of them in several of their, whatever they have, their parliament, are talking about we ought to restrict the use of compounds. These are dangerous. When they get those, they'll come after the traditional bows. They've already taken the guns. You know, it's very, very difficult to have firearms down there. You can do it, but it's very difficult.
Okay.
And only way you can have crossbows down there is you have to be a collector, have a collector's license. You're not going to take it out in public.
Interesting. No,
Yep.
I completely agree with you. That there's a level of challenge that each person can kind of pick that suits their hunting style, suits their area, suits their game. But I certainly get kind of sick of seeing the, you know, who's better or
I
cooler or
think
whatever than everyone else. Yeah. Do you want to jump into, because I think, and maybe we can kind of also just kind of, as we talk through these and how you found them, your 12 factors, how they, you know, I mean, honestly, they still apply. It's not like this was a data driven.
Ever since we created the foundation, all the testing has been with compounds.
Okay.
100% of it. So far, we have found nothing that's different in outcome from what we found when I did the testing with traditional bows.
Awesome.
Not one thing.
Okay. So the first one, let's touch on the first one, structural integrity. And I think this is the one too that when we were talking about some of the bigger expandable type of things where this would honestly be one of the, at least in my opinion, one of the weak points of a big expandable, right? You've got huge, very thin. Yeah, pretty much all expandable. Yeah. So structural integrity, why is that the number one factor of your 12 factors?
Because you can have every other factor there. But if the structural integrity of the arrow fails, then your shot is lost. You're going to lose the animal.
Okay.
You must have that. You can have perfect arrow flight, you know, all the FOC you want to have, high mechanical advantage broadhead, adequate air mass, put everything else in there, all the other factors. If structural integrity fails, nothing else matters.
Okay.
Period.
And when we say
Everything else
fail,
is right there.
fail means break, fail means bend, all the
And
above.
it's not just the broadhead, it's the whole Arrow system. If you have a collar that's aluminum and will hold up, or you've got, a brass insert. We bit tons of brass inserts. I think all the inserts should be steel now, and they should be long enough to have sufficient bearing area to strengthen the shaft. Because when that broadhead slams into a bone, it's that forward velocity slows really quick, and that weight of that shaft behind it is going to push forward, and all that force has got to go somewhere. And a lot of times it's blunderbusting the arrow, or because it's stopped and that air shaft's going ring, 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 it's bending every which direction. You end up breaking it right back where the insert ends.
Okay.
And we have a testing project we're working on now to look to see if we can reduce the breakage. Now, I've got a lot of data. I did a lot of focal study testing that, are not part of our normal testing database. And I did a lot of structural integrity testing with arrows against a cook grate that I still have. It was made from the hatch cover of an armored personnel carrier.
Okay.
And I shot it straight on 90-degree impact from 20 yards. And then I shot it at 45-degree angle impact. And I strove to find the best setups. Well, surprisingly, some of the strongest of all the arrows were some of the wood arrows, particularly the old forged woods. Never damaged one of those on any of the shots. Hickory held up very well. I think I damaged 2 or 3 hickory out of all the ones I shot. Ash wasn't quite as good. Port Arthur cedar's useless. But then when I got to working with carbon shafts, I had to work with internal footings. Now I had to make these out of hardwood, and handmade on a lathe. And I made them in different lengths and different profiles. And when I just had them squared off at the back, on the angular impact, that would stop from damage on direct impact. I mean, I could just rivet a field point up there and not damage the shaft.
Okay.
But when I hit at 45-degree angle, they would almost invariably snap right at the back of that internal footing.
Okay.
And then I got to extending the internal footing, but taking the last 3 inches of it and make it into a parabolic curve. Now, a very slight parabolic curve, so that from where it's touching up here, 3 inches further back, you've got a clearance that was probably not a full millimeter, but close to it.
Okay.
So it's a very slight curve. But when the arrow would hit and structurally sounded from that front part, but when the arrow would start to flex, it gave it support and bent it over a longer distance, reducing that lateral force that was breaking the arrow.
Okay.
And that worked. But they were a pain in the butt. You have no idea how many wood internal footings you have to make to get a matched set of 12. But you go through, you make bunches of them, and then you start sorting them. These weigh this much, and you would come up with usable numbers. But it was a real pain to do. But it made an arrow that worked.
Okay.
That was virtually bomb proof. Well, we're going to do some testing and see if we need to do something like that on a long steel footing. Now, we're looking here particularly at the arrows for the big animals,
Okay.
where you're dealing with a really heavy bone and often adverse angle bone impacts.
Okay. Have you guys done um maybe an example would be kind of insert weight in a lighter point versus a heavier point and a smaller insert. So let's say your setup shot 300 grains total up front the best. Is it more
I hadn't shot that
robust?
little point weight in years.
Oh, 500. Let's make it 500.
Okay, let's say 500 grains up front.
500
That's
grains up
reasonable.
front. Would it be better to put 300 grains in a really stout insert in a 200 grain broadhead, or a smaller insert? Maybe it's a 50, 100 grain insert and more of
Well,
that up in the broadhead.
the only reason for having insert is to make the arrow stronger.
Okay.
Other than that, you want all the weight as far forward as you can get it to increase FOC.
Mm-hmm.
FOC, you know, is the one factor that gives you the most increase in penetration when you've got a structurally secure, perfect flying arrow. No other factor even comes close.
Okay.
Now, broadhead mechanical advantage is the next one down.
Yep. So we got, yeah, number 2 was perfect, or arrow
Yeah,
flight, basically perfect arrow flight.
yeah.
And that means
But
basically your thought with that is you want structurally sound. I know FOC is number 3, but you basically want as much, am I correct in saying, as much weight up front, as heavy of a total setup as you can get while still maintaining perfect arrow flight?
yeah, but you've got to have perfect arrow flight.
Hmm.
If you don't have perfect arrow flight, your FOC won't help you.
Hmm.
You must have structural integrity and perfect arrow flight always. Those two never ever change.
Okay.
Now, FOC can change. It can
Okay.
drop from number 3. And you know when that happens? When you
No.
hit a heavy bone.
Okay.
And factor number 12, the heavy bone threshold, jumps to number 3.
Okay.
FOC showed no effect whatsoever on the ability of the arrow to breach the heavy bone.
Okay.
What it did show was once you breached the bone, it gave you a massive increase in post-breaching penetration compared
Okay.
to a lower FOC arrow. And one thing I want to mention, when I'm talking about these massive gains in penetration with FOC, the massive gains started about 25%. You know, FOC gains compound so that you get such an amount from factor A. Say you got 20% from that. And then from factor B, you got, for simplicity, let's say another 20%. Well, that first 20% is 20% of the increase you got against a normal FOC error, a normal flying error, a normal
Okay.
error setup. I want to think of it that way. So we have now, with the factor, this factor in there, we have gained 20%. The next factor that gains 20% gains 20% of that initial penetration you had, plus 20% of the 20% increase you had.
Okay.
And so it goes with every factor down through there. Uh, each of the penetration enhancing factors.
Okay.
And so it's a compounding thing. If you put Now we are updating factor number 8, the tapered arrow shaft. We'll talk about that later.
Okay.
But if you incorporate 11 or 12 factors into your arrow, compared to a generally used arrow setup like most people are using, you can more than triple the arrow penetration. Let that soak in. We're talking about 15 inches of penetration instead of 5,
Mm-hmm.
30 inches instead of 10.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you get above 25% and on up, and remember, it's compounding every time it goes up, you way more than triple. And when you're up in that above 30%, you're looking at about a 6-fold increase in penetration.
Wow. Okay.
So that's how we're getting ladies going over to Africa and taking a 48-pound recurve and killing Cape buffalo with one arrow.
What what would you say to some of the, with a lot of the heavy stuff, either that I've played with, or when I see the comments like on Troy the Ranch Fairies YouTube channel, of the argument where people say, okay, yeah, this makes sense for shooting Cape buffalo, but I'm just shooting whitetails. I'm just shooting, I don't know, mule deer.
How many people you know that's lost a whitetail?
A lot.
Yeah, I rest my case.
That's
No
fair.
bow hunter has ever lost an animal because his arrow penetrated too much.
That's true. That is very true.
Not going to happen.
Along those same lines, since you touched on factor number 12, the 650 grains,
Most
is
misunderstood factor out there.
is it?
Yep.
My question was around, could that 650 grains be outside of just arrow weight? Could that heavy bone threshold be quantified as like momentum, in that if your speed increased, that weight could decrease if the momentum value was the same?
If it does, it's going to be a very slight amount of decrease
Okay.
because we're not seeing it with the testing that's been done with compounds since
Okay.
we set up the foundation. Well, I guess our first year of pig buffalo testing was 2022, I think 21 or 22 was the first year we started testing on Cape buffalo.
Okay.
And of course, they don't have access to the number of buffalo that I had access to. So it's going to take a long time to build data. But so far, it's looking like there's not much shift in that 650 grain heavy bone threshold.
Okay.
And so I'm going to be surprised if it moves very much. If it moves even down to 600, I'm going to be surprised.
Okay.
I might believe it's going to get down to 625, 630. Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe. Don't
Okay.
know. Till test results are in, you just don't know.
Yeah, that's fair. Do you want to talk about number 4, broadhead mechanical advantage?
Yes.
That
What do you
is
know about it? It's pretty
so
straightforward.
pretty straightforward. So that is, from your testing, from what I remember reading, the single bevel, the two blade single
Well,
bevel, right?
single bevel. Uh, here we go. Back to the heavy bone threshold.
Okay.
When we looked at mechanical advantage and reaching heavy bone at threshold value 650 grains, it made no difference if it was single bevel or double bevel as far as the breaching rate.
Okay.
as long as the mechanical advantage of the head was the same. And we
Okay.
did a fair amount of testing with identical broadheads that were one version double bevel, one version single bevel.
Okay.
And you know, where you will see a difference there is as you get into massive bone or you get into lower force, you're going to see the single bevel reach bone easier.
Okay.
The biggest advantage of the single bevel is that it obviously breaches the bone with less force. Because again, we did extensive testing of the post breaching penetration between identical arrow setups, only difference being one's double bevel, one's single bevel. Single bevel, 100% of the time, gave deeper penetration. So it's
And
obviously conserving arrow force in breaching the bone. So
and
therefore,
the
it's a penetration enhancing factor by letting you get through the bone easier and saving more of your energy force to apply the penetration.
and the mechanical advantage piece of it, that's the 3-to-1 ratio, correct?
Well, not necessarily.
No?
Again, in our heavy bone testing, the actual point where we reached 100% breaching was 2.6.
Okay. And I also touch
Now,
on
again, you've got to look at post-breaching penetration. That's totally different than just breaching the bone. That higher mechanical advantage, just like FOC and single bevel, and it all comes into play after you breach the bone.
okay.
That all kicks back in to give you much more penetration. It's a very complex, it's like a bucket of worms.
And I remember too, talk about number of blades and what you found. 2-blade
Well,
versus
the
3-blade
number of
versus
blades
4-blade.
cuts down your mechanical advantage drastically. And some blade profiles, I know for a lot of people, 3-blade broadheads, among the fixed broadhead users, 3 blades, they love their 3-blade heads. But it is very difficult to split a bone in 3 directions.
Okay.
It's the amount of air force you're using up to get through the bone, if you even get through the bone, with the 3-blade is terrible. A 4-blade actually gets through bone better than a 3-blade does because it's splitting the bone vertically and horizontally in 2 straight lines. You're getting straight line splits.
Okay.
And, you know, bones don't have grain like wood do. They're a matrix. And that's why it's very difficult to split it in 3 directions. And when you get into all soft tissue hits, then you get what you would expect. Single blade penetrates the most, 3-blade comes in next, 4-blade comes in next.
Okay.
But it doesn't hold up as soon as you start hitting bone. So if a guy's got to shoot a multi-blade head, feels like he absolutely has to, then, you know, a 4-blade is better than a 3-blade.
Okay.
Of any design. And I know people love their Winslow Woodsmans, but I've got an awful lot of photos of torn up Winslow Woodsman. Where animals just mangled them.
Your number 5 rule, shaft diameter to ferrule diameter ratio.
Yes.
So that is that's making sure your broadhead ferrule is 30% larger. Is that correct
No,
than your shaft?
no, the differential was 5%.
5%. Okay.
And in testing it made, excuse me, made no difference that I could measure between being 5% smaller and being 10% smaller. It looks like 5% is that critical point
Okay.
where and one of the things people don't think about, they think about, oh, that's, the hole is bigger and then it steps down. And then, if you got a collar, it steps down from that to the shaft. But in reality, what I think is happening is that it is creating a space between the initial wound and the arrow footing or shaft, collar or shaft, to allow blood to flow in there. Blood is really slick,
Okay.
slippery, and it has a thing called a capillary effect. You create a small gap and it'll almost get sucked into it.
Okay.
And I think that's what's happening, and you're getting a lubricating effect to the shaft.
Mm-hmm. That does make
When
sense.
you've got a shaft that gets bigger, like a barrel tapered shaft, which you don't get anything except in traditional equipment, where it's small at the front, small at the back, and fattest in the middle, penetration goes way down.
Okay.
It's with identical arrow setup, for shaft weight, broadhead. That was the type of testing we did with that. Was we looked at parallel shafts. These were all working with hickory shafts, and I would have parallel shafts, taper shafts, full taper, and then barrel taper shafts, and I get them all the arrows the same weight, within plus or minus 5 grains, and same broadhead on them, same everything, shot in the same bow into the same animal, and look at the outcome difference. And that's the way we came up with that study. And we tried it with different profile broadheads, and make sure across the board it seemed to give us the same results.
Okay. Number 6, arrow weight and mass. We kind of touched on this already.
Yep.
But
Now
basically,
we're getting into momentum, the pure effect of momentum,
okay.
without factoring in FOC.
Okay.
This is the old thing of a train going 2 miles an hour is harder to stop than an automobile going 100 miles an hour.
And you would agree that, I guess, or maybe explain why momentum is a better unit of measure for penetration versus kinetic energy.
Kinetic energy, it's by definition, because kinetic energy is all the force of a body in motion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that includes the vibration of your arrow, the sound your arrow makes, all of the flexional energy that goes into it, the whistling sound of the feathers, everything about it, all is part of the energy of the arrow.
Okay.
Momentum is a quantifiable force that has a direction, and it must be met by an equal amount of force going the opposite direction in order for it to stop.
Okay.
So the greater the momentum, the greater the force required to stop it. But remember our velocity thing too.
Mm-hmm.
You double that velocity, resistance went up by a factor of 4. Yep. You got a lot more force from this resistance to push back on that arrow.
Mm-hmm.
So all these things are twisted and tied together, and you don't want to know how many nights I spent lying awake trying to figure this stuff out.
Well, we're
And I
sure
got
glad you did.
Pretty good math and science background, but I was starting from scratch with this stuff.
Mm-hmm. This one is one that when I started following you, Troy, all that, this factor was one that I will be perfectly honest, I didn't pay nearly as much attention to, and I can 100% still improve on. Broadhead edge finish, the sharpness of your broadheads. I was definitely that person that if it said hunt ready, out of the pack, I in my quiver, even if I shot through animals, I might have touched up broadheads with some very cheap type of sharpening devices that you could get at Walmart or wherever.
Yeah.
But talk about just how important that broadhead sharpness is when it comes
Well,
to.
what we want to do is create hemorrhage. Now, that's how an arrow kills,
Mhm.
or a knife for that matter. So we want to create as much hemorrhage as we can. So when you cut or tear your way through a blood vessel, it's going to bleed. Now, there's a whole long thing called the clotting cascade, uh, where the trauma to the inner lining of the cell wall creates a release of prothrombin, which reacts with proteins of the blood, causing thrombin. Then
Okay.
the thrombin will uh, attach with a protein and form fibrinogen. Now, the fibrinogen forms fibrin, which is what attaches to the cut to create a clot. Now, if you've got a rough, torn edge where it severed the vessel, then that gives a lot of places for these little fibers to attach. And then the little fibers all coalesce together and they stop the bleeding.
Okay.
Now, if you've got a smooth cut, there's no place for them to attach easily. Also, with the smooth cut, there was less damage to the cells lining the wall of the blood vessel. So less prothrombin was created, so less thrombin, less fibrinogen, less fiber, and so forth, right on down the line. So
Okay.
the two go hand in hand in keeping it bleeding as long as possible. And that's why you want as slick and smooth, thin, and sharp an edge as you can get. The thinner the edge, the better,
Okay.
which is one of the places where the single bevels really shine, except for some of these that people are getting stupid, ridiculous with of 40-degree bevels and stuff. Um, that also, I believe, initiates bone skids, but that's beside the point.
Okay.
Uh, can't prove that yet, so we'll hold off. But it's certainly looking that way in the early testing. That's a tip for people upcoming.
Okay.
At
And
the rate
this
we're
would
going,
be
it'll probably take another 3 or 4 years to find out for sure. But
okay. And this would kind of be with what you just described then, when a lot of times when people talk about the mechanicals, and
mhm.
maybe they're saying, okay, um, yes, my blades probably aren't as structurally sound. Um, they might not be made out of, a lot of them might not be made out of the same quality of steel as some of the fixed blade heads. But I've got, you know what? Even if my blade's dull a little, I'm still shoving this huge cutting diameter through there, therefore making a bigger wound channel. With what you just described, excuse me, it sounds like that isn't necessarily the case. If a big gaping, a big dull, we'll call it hole, is not necessarily better than a smaller but very clean cut hole.
If you ever see many battlefield wounds, you'll begin to understand how severe a big hole even the frail human body survives.
Okay.
Big holes don't kill things. Little holes that go through vital things kill things.
Okay. Let's number 8. This is the shaft profile. Is this where you're talking
Yes,
about the
that's what we're
tapered
going to.
shaft?
Yeah, we've actually already done it on our website. I think it's been done. I haven't checked to see.
Okay.
But if not, it'll be done here in the next few days. With the advance we've got in materials for arrow setups now, compared to when I finished testing, you've got all this stuff available that wasn't available then. And it allows us to build arrows with amounts of FOC, structurally secure arrows, tunable arrows, with FOCs that I could only dream of back then. And we've reached a point where properly set up high FOC, ultra high FOC arrows on a parallel shaft. I mean, every buffalo shot that Rob has taken has been a complete pass through, all the way from 2021 or whenever he started with this testing on his actual hunted animals. Has been a pass through. The one that wasn't did something I did before he went to the hunt. I told him I did not know if any arrow setup could do. His first arrow into the Cape Buffalo hit the ball joint of the shoulder.
Okay.
Now that's about a 5-inch thick bone, and it busted it all to pieces.
Wow.
I did not know that that was possible because I'd never tested it. I just wasn't convinced that an arrow was going to pass through 5 inches of solid bone. But it did. Now he put a second arrow in it, through it, but it broke the shoulder. It couldn't go very far.
What was like his arrow setup for that? Do you know?
I want to say that he was shooting about 970.
Okay.
But he has since upped his buffalo arrow setup, and he's shooting about 1,100 grains now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Out of an 82 pound. But that brings that velocity down, which helps him out. So, and he did last year. Yeah, last year he shot a Asian buffalo in Argentina. Now, those are the biggest of the buffalo species. They're the ones that's got kind of little short horns, but they've got massive bodies. They get up to 2,600 pounds.
Oh, geez. Okay.
And I think he used a 670 grain arrow on it because he wanted to try it. And he did get a pass through, but it was also an absolute perfect place shot.
Okay.
And when he started testing after he had it down with that same arrow setup, he said, it won't work on the adverse angle.
Yeah.
And with buffalo, you just don't know. The buffalo gets a vote.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I can't even imagine. I mean, I'm a 2,600 pound animal, and to be able to do that with what you're saying, being able to break that.
Well, that was a
ball
30,
joint.
I believe a 34% FOC error.
Okay.
That he used it at what 670 grains, I think it was, somewhere in that ballpark.
Okay. Your factor number 9, broadhead arrow silhouette.
Yes.
I guess kind of describe what that is for everybody that's listening. Is this kind of similar in a sense of the ferrule to shaft diameter ratio, but
no, it's because of lumps and bumps create drag. Think of the super sleek supersonic aircraft they're designing now, like the B-21 Raider, something like that.
Okay.
You don't want lumps and bumps. That's the reason the Air Force is now moving all their weapon systems to internal bays. Get rid of the lumps and bumps out here. Lumps and bumps cause drag, because drag in the air, drag gets worse when you go through a denser medium. So when you go into that tissue or into those bones, those lumps and bumps, no matter how small, create problems. And
And those
sometimes they just chatter out bone chips and stuff. You can tell they had a hard time getting through. And I've even seen some of them come back where the metal is gouged, where the bones have gouged out metal on some of these lumps and bumps on
and these
broadheads.
okay, that's what I was going to ask. You're talking mainly on the head itself,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Yeah.
But you want that everywhere. You want as streamlined as you can get.
Hmm.
You know, again, it's all flight dynamics. It's no different than these, you know, sixth generation now fighter jets they're creating. You know, they're trying to do away with the tail, the vertical tail on the aircraft, and do all of the steering with adjustable nozzles at the back to
Okay.
reduce air drag. So, you know, every little thing you could possibly do if when you're working at that upper threshold,
Hmm.
you know, and we have to work at the upper threshold because we have so little force. The engine driving it is not very big.
Hmm.
You know, uh, the heaviest aero setups I've ever seen. I can't remember the guy's name now. He passed through on the Elephant. I think 3 shots in a row. You know, the killing shot and then 2 test shots afterwards. Uh, he was not generating as much kinetic energy as a 22 long rifle.
Oh, wow.
Now that gives you a concept of how little force we are operating with. You know, the typical hunting setup out there is working with only a small portion of the force of a 22 long rifle.
Hmm.
So we have to do everything we can to conserve that force and maximize the amount of work in the physics sense of work we can get out of that error.
Yeah.
And that's why all these little things matter.
Yep. No, and that makes that makes perfect sense. Let's talk your number 10. We kind of did already a little bit, but this is type of edge bevel. So this is the single
Yep.
bevel versus double bevel, right?
Yep. Uh, the testing in all soft tissue, the single bevels did consistently uh, get more penetration than matching arrow setups, except for a double bevel. Uh, so there appears to be a very slight advantage in soft tissue as
Okay.
far as actual penetration. But we're talking linear penetration there. That single bevel is creating a spiral.
Hmm.
So the path of its cut is much longer than the linear penetration.
Okay.
So it is an advantage there. But the big advantage, of course, is creating the bone splits, allowing the air to use up less of that little bitty force we got to breach the bone. It's not having to push its way through the bone.
Hmm.
It's going in just a little way, and because of the torque created, it's splitting it and pops it right out.
Okay.
Pops right
Did you
on through.
did you ever find that was there ever any difference flight wise single bevel versus double bevel in the sense that the single bevel creating rotation also while flying just through the air, did it ever matter at all with any of your accuracy?
Well, I did a really interesting experiment, and it's something that is on the list somewhere down the line. I got several pages of lists of stuff to test. that I'd like to see revisited. But you know, you always hear people say that never shoot broadheads on an unfledged shaft.
Mm-hmm.
So I took some tuned shafts, and I had a 190 grain. What did they call that? Pro Big Game that Riptech down in Australia made for a while. It wasn't one of those ring ferrule like the Riptechs everybody thinks about. It was an absolute mirror copy of a 190 Grizzly, except it was double bevel, and it was beveled at 12 and a half degrees on each edge. So it had a 25-degree bevel, just like the Grizzly. Okay. It's just that it was double bevel instead of single bevel. And so I set those two up to test. And I lost my train of thought. This is what happens with long COVID. What were we even talking? What did I start out talking about?
You were talking about the and I apologize, I just forgot the name, but a broadhead that you were testing from Australia, 190 grain, where you had a duplicate version, basically a double bevel.
Yeah, I've got all that. I just can't remember what it was. The point I was trying to make. What did we start out talking about?
I was asking if you ever noticed a accuracy difference between a double bevel and a single bevel.
That was the key I needed. I'm sorry, I'm not usually not like this.
That's okay.
I hope I get better on this medicine. I took those mounted up arrow systems, unfletched, and put me up about a 12-foot target because I didn't know what it was going to do. And I backed up to 20 yards and put me an aiming point on there and started shooting at it. And I found it real interesting that the double bevels look like a shotgun pattern.
Okay.
They were just everywhere. But the single bevels, all, which way did they go? Yeah, all did sort of a barrel roll and went into a group down and to the right.
Okay.
So they shot into about, it wasn't a great group, it's like a foot or so. But compared to the double bevels, which had about a 4-foot group, there obviously, and you would think there has to be some steering effect, some flight effect, some rotational effect in the air, if you want to think of it that way, created by the single bevel. And that's something I'd like, of course, at some point. We got so much other stuff to do. We'll get there one of these days. Yeah, everybody, all the board members have got copies of my long list of stuff to test. So when I croak, that will live on.
And the last one that we haven't talked about yet, number 11, tip design.
Yeah.
You've got the Tonto tip as being the kind of the premier tip design of a broadhead, but can you explain kind of why tip design is important, what types of tips, I guess, worked well, which ones didn't?
We'll go back all the way back to factor one. A tiny tip bend reduces penetration in all soft tissue. It'll reduce penetration by 14%.
Okay.
And I'm talking about something that, you know, you just have to hold up sideways on the edge to look at it to see the little tip bend. Now, if you get a ski bend, oh, that just destroys penetration. It redirects the air.
Okay.
And then you've got a shaft falling behind it trying to bend around this turn that the broadhead is steering it on. And you can imagine what that does to your air of force. And you've probably seen instances of this. Now you see it commonly too with mechanicals where one blade opens before the other. But even with traditional heads where they've been, I've seen instances of arrows going in and exiting almost 90 degrees from the angle they went in at.
Okay.
Almost making a 90-degree turn. So it's amazing how much penetration you lose, even from that little tip bend. So you have to have, just like with the overall arrow setup, structural integrity at the tip.
Yeah.
That's important. Now, there are some other tips that have good structural integrity. And what I did was take identical arrow setups, same broadhead, same everything, and I put 7 different tip designs on. And then I tested them in soft tissue, and I tested them on straight on bone shots and angular bone impacts, and looked at what was happening. And I, off the top of my head, cannot remember the percentages anymore. But I know compared to the worst design, the Tanto tip was like 127% greater penetration.
Okay.
And over the second best, it was still around 30%. And the second best was around the tip.
Okay.
Now, what the concept, you want tip string, but you want a sharp enough point on that tip to create an initial bite in a bone when you hit the bone angularly. Now, you got to remember, most animals, the ribs are fairly domed.
Mm-hmm.
So it is really difficult to get a square on hit. Now, some people say, oh, if you got a real open ribbed animal where there's a big space between them, this might have some validity. They want to skid off and go between. But the skidding off is redirecting your arrow.
Okay.
So you're losing a lot of arrow force. So I'm not sure it's the great advantage that they think it is. So ideally, at least to my way of thinking, I want that tip to bite into the bone, even on a curved surface. And crack that surface so the arrow gets a bite. And then the force of the arrow, which is flying perfectly, of course, and going absolutely straight. And our force vector is now pushing it directly forward, is going to push right on through that bone. And if you've got a single bevel on there, it's going to get just a little ways in, pop the bone open, and right on through. And interestingly, you'll hear a lot of people mention it when they start shooting single bevel heads, particularly on good arrow setups, that they never hear a whack of it hitting a bone. You hear just a little stick as it snaps that bone, as it splits it. It is a totally different sound.
What was in your studies, what was the, I guess, widest cutting diameter you tested?
There were some pretty wide ones in there. Of course, towards the end, I did test a lot of the wide cut mechanicals.
Okay.
From about 2005 on.
That's perfect.
I don't remember the widest cut, but there were some humongous mechanical 3-blade that were probably 3-inch plus cut.
And when you were testing those, that was on a live animal, or that was after you had harvested them?
I will not hunt with any setup that I haven't previously tested.
Okay.
I want to be sure I am using the most ethical, best performing setup I can.
Okay.
So, For the last many years, I shot at any given time one arrow for everything, from shooting rabbits to buffalo. I always shot the same arrow. It's like the guy that's only got one gun. You get pretty used to figuring out the trajectory of that arrow and the performance that it will give you. But when I found a setup that worked better than what I was using, well, I dropped the old one and changed to the new one. Then I shot only this one. And I've done that all the way through the testing from the Natal study on.
Okay. Where I was gonna kind of ask, one of my, I guess, biggest kind of eye-opening experiences was when I switched to a sharp fixed blade. Particularly when I switched, I started with some Magnus products, and I've tried some other stuff, but basically any good solid two blade fixed blade was how the animal, and in my case they would be whitetail deer, how they reacted versus when I would shoot them
Well,
with
you
a
get very little
mechanical.
reaction.
Yep.
If you've got a good flying arrow and it just zips right through sharp broadhead, I've had animals actually just jump, flinch, look around, go back to eating, and just fall over.
Mm-hmm.
And
The
a
first.
lot of just jump, and they don't take off like somebody just torched their rear end.
Yep.
You know, they just kind of bound away a little bit, stop, look. Even very high strung animals like impala, which make an antelope look like he's old and geriatric. Actually, a sidelight on that. I have always, from the time I was a kid, because we shot a lot of rabbits in front of hounds. I've always practiced running shots.
Okay.
But I found out that the only way that I could get good results with impala was to shoot them when they were walking.
Okay.
You never shoot at an impala standing still. At least not with a trad bow. I tell you that for sure. But if he was walking, and that's another one of those hunting skills, nobody practices moving shots. And it irks me no end. You may be one of the people that do it. I don't know. I probably shouldn't say this. On their videos, they've got a deer walking by and they make a sound to get it to stop, whether it's a call, whatever they do. All you've done is alerting. You're going to increase his reaction.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take much practice to become a good shot, good enough for shooting game at on moving targets. And we shot flying birds. We shot whatever came along.
Mm-hmm.
And now they don't even think about taking a moving shot. They want to stop the animal. And to me, that's counterintuitive. I don't want that animal to realize that there's something there. I don't want to put him on alert.
Mm-hmm.
And so just shoot him when he's walking. The kill zone's just as big when he's moving as when he's standing still.
Yeah.
You've just got to learn to, okay, he's moving. If I were like some of these people trying to shoot 100 yards, I'd probably have problems with it. I can do 100 yards and a lot further with a rifle on a moving target, but not with an arrow. But out to 30 yards, I had no trouble with moving targets, even small moving targets. And anybody can learn to do that.
Okay.
How many people practice it? How many people have you ever seen practice?
Very
Once in a
few.
while, if you go to some club, they might have a novelty shoot where they throw discs in the air, and they usually throw those straight up so it pauses at the top, so that at least some people will be able to hit it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pathetic how poor people shoot on those things. And that's another one of those vanishing hunting skills.
No, I would
And
agree.
also one of the reasons I like my trad bows, particularly my long bow, much easier to hit a moving target.
Hmm.
There's taking fast shots for the compound because of that break in cadence is very difficult. And there's different ways of shooting. If you ever done any shotgun shooting, uh, the Holland and Holland Scooby shotgun shooting, they teach you this fluid movement of you're following, you bring your shotgun up, when the butt plate touches your shoulder, you fire. You're aiming your whole body for the
Okay.
shot. The other method is the fixed lead, which if you're going to shoot a compound, you just about have to do, where you're going to have a time lag in there where you come to full draw, establish your lead, and then start swinging to maintain that lead. Where with my longbow, I don't. I follow with the animal and shoot.
Okay.
And it's just one fluid motion.
Okay.
And way more effective.
Okay.
And which is one of the reasons for the type of hunting I do, where you're stalking in really close on animals. Sometimes you get in close and you do spook that animal. And it's going to be a moving shot, hopefully at a matter of 4 or 5 yards.
Hmm.
Well, if you can't hit the thorax of a deer at 4 or 5 yards, moving, if you're practiced at it, well, you better go home because you ain't never going to kill a rabbit.
Now that we've talked through your factors, I kind of wanted to know if you thought, um, as technology advances, um, I don't know if material is really an advancement or not, but basically just technology in general. Do you think there will ever be a fixed blade that you would be confident hunting in? Or sorry, not a fixed blade, mechanical. Do you think that they
Well,
will eventually?
we did in 2023, 2022. Uh, we had the first ever mechanical to survive the structural integrity test on the broadside 90-degree impact shot in the buffalo test. First
Okay.
one ever. That was a Sever titanium, something like that.
Yep.
I'd have to look the name. I believe that's what it was, Sever titanium. The next phase of this testing will be the real crux of what's going to happen.
Okay.
Uh, that will be the angular impact, the adverse angle shots against that wall of Cape Buffalo ribs.
Hmm.
Which is, you can hit that, you can hit any bone. I don't care if it's no bigger than your little finger. Yeah, you can hit it at an angle. And all we're doing is getting a surface where we can get angular impact consistently and see what happens to it. And basically, we're looking at redirecting. And I have, Rob did that testing. I have never even held that broadhead in my hand. But I've been looking at this swing blade and talking to Rob about it. And it sounds like as it hits the blade, at an angle, a blade will swing away. But at some point, the other one's going to hit and start to deploy. And at some point, it's going to lock up. They apparently lock together
Yep.
once they deploy to a certain point. Well, at that point, you're going to have an error coming into an animal with one blade swung completely away and the other blade pushing forward, angled forward. That's going to cause some real problems, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Yeah. And the other thing that we were kind of disappointed in with that head was uh, the front, the leading blade, the whatever they want to call it. It was terribly dull.
Okay.
Down in the butter knife, when we
The
tested on the best tester, yeah.
Okay. You're talking about like what the little basically what is protruding in the closed position that initiates the blades
Yeah,
from
yeah,
opening? Okay.
yeah. And well, so we'll just have to wait and see how everything pans out on the additional testing with it. But at this point, my hat is off to them. They are the first broadhead to ever survive even the 90-degree impact in the buffalo testing. And we have tested a lot of mechanicals, and we've weeded out a lot of other mechanicals, because like when we do testing here in Texas on pigs, and we've got plenty of those. If it fails on pigs, there's no sense carrying it tested on buffalo. So we can eliminate a lot right off the bat.
Okay. When it that was another, talking about testing, that was another question I wanted to ask you, is if there are any good non-animal test methods, test mediums. I mean, you see a lot of people on YouTube, right, shooting through ballistic gel or boned out shoulder blades or frozen shoulder blades or things like that. Is there anything that is not an actual animal that is a good representation of performance, or are a lot of those type of tests just kind of a
Well,
good YouTube video or a good way to maybe compare apples to apples broadheads, but maybe not necessarily on animal performance?
listen real close because this is complex.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Uh, Actually, I stuck this in my notes. Let me look it up so I
Okay.
don't get it wrong. Now, this comes from the FBI white paper dated September the 26th, 2014, from the FBI Training Division justifying the 9mm caliber selection. Quote, the single most important factor in effectively wounding a human target is to have penetration to a scientifically valid depth.
Okay.
And then from their report on handgun penetration testing, the critical element is penetration. Bullet must pass through the large blood-bearing organs. Too little penetration will get you killed. Any bullet which will not penetrate through vital organs from less than optimal angles is not acceptable. And that quote is by Yuri Patrick of the FBI. Okay, that's pretty much the same thing that we saw in the testing there. Now we get down to talking about ballistics testing. Quoting again, if you were to take a pork roast and try to push your finger into it, you basically could not cause your finger to perforate the meat unless you were exceptionally strong. But I can poke my finger into natural ballistic gelatin relatively easily. And I can poke it into clear gel with a bit more effort. I can take a chunk of clear gel and tear it apart in my hands, but I would have great difficulty in getting the meat to do that, except where it might separate along various muscle groups. Ballistic gel testing might look cool, but it is not representative of anything that occurs in tissues.
Okay.
That pretty much takes care of ballistic gel.
Yep.
That concept really holds true for all the other test mediums.
Okay.
But that's coming straight from the FBI. I used to trust the FBI's opinion on stuff up till recently here. And I'm not sure I trust their opinion on stuff as much lately. But I have tested on just about every medium I can think of.
Okay.
And I have found nothing that will replicate tissue.
Let's I know you you already told it, but from the technical difficulties, if you could kind of wrap us up with Troy's
Yeah.
request of AK-47s and cigarette story.
Well, I traveled all through Southern Africa, guiding people. And so it took me to a lot of countries that weren't terribly politically stable. And as you're going down the road there, you come to a government checkpoint, and then further down the road, you'll run into a checkpoint that's run by the rebels, where you've you know got some 12, 13-year-old kid with an AK-47 out there. But at either checkpoint, whether it's the government or whether it's the rebels, when you roll up, the first question is not what are you doing, where you going, anything like that. It's what'd you bring me today?
Okay.
So you're going to give them something, or you're not going to get through there. And I'd get a carton of cigarettes and I'd hide them. And I'd take a pack with 6 cigarettes in it and I'd put it up on the dash. And when they'd ask me, I'd start looking around the car and thinking, and then I'd get the pack of cigarettes and I'd tap them out. So, well, I've only got 6 cigarettes. Tell you what, I'll give you half of them, and I'll keep half, and that'll be enough to get me to somewhere where I can buy some more. And then they're perfectly happy. It's not the quantity of what they get. It's just the thing that you're going to give them something, or you're not going to get through there.
Okay.
And then I'd go down the road, and I put my 3 back in, and then the next checkpoint's liable to be that 12, 13-year-old kid with an AK down there, which scares you half to death, because he's always got the finger on the trigger. And the same thing, what'd you bring me today? Works just as well with him as it did with the Army soldier you passed 20 miles back down the road. Give him 3 cigarettes. Well, he gave me half of what he had. Well, that's good enough. Get going. Once you give them something, they usually don't care, ask you anything about where you're going, what you're doing. Just go on.
Did you ever have to go buy any of like the same ones? And nobody ever caught on or anything like that?
Nobody ever caught on.
No.
No, I'd hide them quite good in the car.
Okay.
And, then I'd get down the road, and I would stop down the road and get my carton of cigarettes out and get me 3 more cigarettes to put back in that pack, put it right back on the dash, ready for the next one. Well, I guess if I ran it too close together, I just have to give them the last 3.
Yeah, there you go. Give them all of them.
Well, I know people that have, been forced to fork over $100 to get through some of those places.
Oh, geez.
So that little trick was quite handy.
I would say, yeah, that's seemed to work out pretty good.
Not much. What's your favorite animals to hunt?
Mine, I mean, I'm in Michigan. I'm a big whitetail hunter, but I've turkey hunted, I've upland bird hunted, I've done a little black bear hunting. I'm going on my first elk hunt. Going on my first elk hunt in about a month, so I'm pretty excited about that. Yeah, I've been working on it. I've been carrying packs and weighted vests and doing all that as much as I possibly could. So, but yeah,
bear hunting was high on my list. I liked bear hunting, and pigs were God's gift to the bow hunter.
Yeah,
and then buffalo, I guess, are my favorite of all. But hunting anything is wonderful. Get out there and hunt. That's what everybody needs to do.
Absolutely.
Don't spend so dogging much time sitting behind a target. Get out there and start shooting them flying birds and running rabbits. Just have fun. That's what people don't do anymore. They take it too serious.
Oh, I agree. And I think at least in my collective group of friends, I'm starting to see a little shift where some people are, at least on the whitetail side of things, coming around to a little more of the camaraderie aspect of it again, and worrying less about inches or all that kind of stuff. I certainly am. But no, I completely agree. Get out there, enjoy the outdoors, whatever it is that you like to hunt. Or, I mean, gosh, if somebody even listened to this and they weren't a hunter, fishing, whatever it is, just get out there, enjoy the outdoors, enjoy God's creation. And I think think this world would be a better place if a lot more people did it. That's for sure. Thank you again for coming on here and doing this with me. Hopefully we
My
can do this
pleasure.
again. If I have any more questions, I might have to pick your brain some more.
Oh, always available. That's
All
why I
right.
won't get for anymore.
Well, thank you, sir.
Oh, you're most welcome.